Chapter 1. The River Never Forgot. It swallowed Dharon Saxen whole, dark and cold beneath the swollen branches of dead trees that clawed at the mist. Days later, his body surfaced, pale, bloated, eyes staring blank into an unforgiving sky. Suicide, they said. Tragedy. End of story. But beneath the mud and rot, something had already awakened. Charles Smith stood on the cracked asphalt of Mill Hollow Road, staring at the iron gates that groaned open like a wound. The Saxon estate was worse than he imagined, rotting wood sagging under moss and mildew, windows smeared with grime so thick it swallowed any light hole. A house not just decayed, but suffocating in its own secrets. He shifted the briefcase in his hand. The will inside weighed more than paper. It carried promise or poison. Behind him, the wind whispered through skeletal branches. Not quite a sound, a pressure in the air. Charles blinked. For a moment, he thought he saw someone watching from the shadowed tree line near the riverbank. But when he looked again, there was only darkness, breathing in silence. He shook off the chill crawling up his spine and stepped forward. "Mr. Smith?" The voice startled him out of his thoughts. Soft, measured, female. Charles turned to see her standing near the gate. Angelina Vale, black hair tangled by wind, eyes sharper than knives hidden behind lashes that flickered like candle flames. She held herself still, but her presence throbbed like a secret heartbeat. "I wasn't expecting company," Charles said. She smiled thinly. "You're not expected at all." Something flickered beneath her calm, a ripple of knowing too deep for strangers. They walked side by side toward the mansion's yawning entrance, where peeling wallpaper hung like dead skin, and floorboards creaked with every hesitant step. Inside smelled of dust and despair, old paperbacks rotting on shelves, damp earth seeping up from cracks in the stone basement below. Charles's boots echoed hollow as shadows stretched across walls, elongated figures twisting beyond reason. "Why did Dharon leave everything to you?" Angelina asked suddenly. Charles frowned. "I'm his attorney." Her lips twitched. Amusement or mockery? He couldn't tell. "No," she whispered close enough to catch his breath. To her eyes flicked toward a faded photograph hanging crookedly on a wall. Angela Trivedi's smiling faintly, innocence drowned beneath layers of unspoken dread. Before Charles could reply, a slow thud rattled from downstairs, a deliberate heartbeat beneath silence. Both froze. "What was that?" Charles hissed. Angelina's gaze sharpened to ice-cold steel. "We were warned not to open doors after 2:13 a.m. A clock chimed somewhere unseen, a cold ring slicing through shadows. His watch read 2:12 a.m. The house seemed to inhale around them, the air thickening with unseen breath, something waiting just beyond sight, watching, stalking their faltering courage. Charles swallowed hard as footsteps echoed, not theirs, coming from deeper within the blackened halls. Then, a scraping sound, low and desperate, as if fingernails dragged over dry bone, and somewhere inside the mansion, the lights went out. The wind dragged a low, ragged moan through the cracked windows of the Saxon estate. Angela Vale pressed her palm against the cold glass of the parlor, feeling the chill seep beneath her skin like a slow poison. Outside, the sky was bruised, heavy with storm clouds that blotted out even the moonlight, and the black river nearby whispered secrets in a tongue she couldn't quite catch. She had arrived just hours ago, stepping from the rusting gate into a house that smelled of damp wood and forgotten sins. The shadows inside didn't belong to any normal night. They seemed alive, shifting along walls with an intent that made her breath hitch. The house wasn't just old. It was waiting. "Angela," Charles Smith's voice cracked through the sudden silence, a dry rasp that made her start. He stood in the doorway, eyes darting to every corner, as if expecting something to jump out. Rational man, she reminded herself. A detective by training. Yet here he was, looking as unnerved as she felt. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his jaw tight. "This place, it's not right." Her fingers trembled against the window pane, tracing fogged patterns no warmer than ice. "It's mine now," she replied softly, "whether I want it or not." Charles stepped forward, voice dropping to a whisper. "The townsfolk talk about Dharon Saxen like he was cursed, like his soul got eaten by whatever he worshipped out there." His glance flicked toward the woods beyond the river, where faint embers flickered in their depths, like eyes watching from dark hollows. Angela swallowed hard. "And those whispers, they're real?" Before Charles could answer, A sudden thud echoed upstairs, a heavy, deliberate knock that wasn't wind or falling debris. Both froze. Angela's heart hammered against ribs that suddenly felt too tight. "Did you hear that?" Her voice was brittle. "Yeah," Charles breathed out. "We shouldn't be alone here." A metallic scent drifted through the air, the sharp tang of old blood mingled with wet earth, and for a moment Angela swore she heard faint chanting just beneath the storm's roar. Low voices threading ancient words she couldn't understand, but which crawled under her skin like crawling insects. "Did anyone else know you were coming?" Charles asked, eyes narrowing. "No one." She gripped her coat tighter around herself. "Except I'm starting to think someone wanted me here." The parlor clock ticked erratically, stuttering between seconds, as if time itself stuttered under some unseen weight. Then came a whisper, not from outside, but behind them, soft as silk, sliding over stone. "Do not open after 2:13. Angela spun around. Empty room stared back. Her breath hitched cold and fast. "Who said that?" Charles demanded, though his voice betrayed doubt even to his own ears. She shook her head slowly, but felt it deep in her bones. And it wasn't meant for them. Outside, lightning clawed at the sky again, revealing fleeting silhouettes near the edge of the forest, figures wrapped in darkness moving toward the mansion with silent purpose. Angela's gaze locked on those shadows, and something inside snapped open like an ancient door long sealed shut. They weren't alone, and whatever waited was coming for them both. Chapter 3. The night air in Saxon's mansion pressed against Charles's skin like damp velvet, thick with the scent of rotting wood and cold stone. Somewhere deep below, the house groaned, a slow, wet sound, like breath escaping from ancient lungs. He hesitated at the threshold of the basement door, fingertips grazing the rusted iron handle. A shiver chased down his spine. The darkness beneath was a black pit he wanted to avoid. Yet something about it, something unresolved, pulled him closer. "Do not open after 2:13, Angela had whispered earlier that evening, voice barely more than a thread of sound caught in her throat. Charles glanced at his watch. 2:11 a.m. His heartbeat thundered, loud enough to drown out the silence that stretched like a noose around him. He swallowed and pushed down the warning. Rationality fought for space amid the growing fog inside his mind. "This is just an old house," he told himself. "No ghosts here." But then the floorboards creaked behind him, slow, deliberate. Charles spun, eyes scanning the shadow-clotted hallway. Nothing moved, yet a presence lingered, watching, waiting. His breath hitched, cold fingers tangled through his thoughts. "Charles?" The voice came from just beyond the stairwell, a soft but unfamiliar whisper that sliced through the quiet like broken glass. He stepped back toward the stairs, every muscle coiled tight as wire. Angela stood there, pale and still, her eyes reflecting something Charles couldn't name, a storm behind calm waters. "You shouldn't be down there," she said. Her voice was steady but brittle. A tremor ran beneath it. "What is this place?" Charles asked, nodding toward the basement door. "Why did Dharon hide it?" Angela's gaze flickered away. "Because some doors are meant to stay closed." Her words sent a chill deeper than the cellar's cold could reach. Before Charles could press further, a sudden crash shattered silence, wood splintering downstairs, far off yet too close to ignore. They froze. "Did you hear that?" Angela whispered. "Yes." Charles gripped her arm, not out of comfort, but shared fear, as if touching her might anchor him to reality slipping away like smoke and wind. Together they edged toward the bottom stairwell when the lights flickered violently, plunging them into ragged shadows dancing across peeling wallpaper and cracked moldings. A scent rose then, faint but unmistakable, burnt incense mixed with iron and something sweeter. Decay? Charles blinked hard and suddenly remembered something Professor Chatterjee had murmured earlier. The black devotee bound himself with blood rites older than this land. A dreadful certainty knotted in Charles's gut. This house was no mere ruin, it was a tomb, wrapped in secrets darker than night itself. As they reached the foot of the stairs, Angela stopped abruptly and pointed behind Charles without turning around. "I'm not alone here," she said quietly, lips tight. Charles spun and saw nothing but darkness bleeding into corners where shadows grew impossibly thick and heavy, waiting. Then, a low rasp echoed from beneath their feet, a voice or breath, impossible to tell, and with it came a scraping noise, nails or claws, dragging slowly across stone walls deep within that cavernous belly below them. Suddenly, Angela grabbed his wrist fiercely and pulled him backward up the stairs. But as they turned, a figure blocked their path on the landing above. Tall, shrouded in black robes soaked by rain, or worse. Eyes burning red like embers in a dying fire, stared down at them without mercy or recognition. No one spoke. No one moved. Only that oppressive silence, the kind that swallows hope whole. Until finally, the figure raised an arm slowly and pointed downward into that abyss below where Dharon Saxen lay dead, or so they thought, and whispered, "The devotee never sleeps," then vanished as suddenly as it appeared, leaving behind only heavy darkness and two hearts pounding fast enough to fracture bones. Charles gasped aloud, "We need to get out, now." But even as they raced for the door, a faint chanting rose behind them, soft at first, then louder, swelling like a tide rolling over broken graves. And somewhere deep beneath that cursed house, the river outside began to stir again, restless as death awakening from a long nightmare. There was no escape now. Not tonight. Chapter 4. The walls of the old Saxon mansion seemed to breathe, slow and heavy. Charles stood just inside the cracked front door, a faint smell of rot curling around his nostrils, like something dead had been left to stew in this house for decades. He swallowed hard, eyes flicking to the shadows pooling beneath the stained glass windows. The dusk pressed in thick and suffocating. Each breath tasted stale, like dust mixed with forgotten prayers. "Why am I here again?" His voice sounded brittle, foreign. Angela's footsteps echoed behind him, soft but deliberate. She didn't answer. Instead, her gaze lingered on the hallway where portraits warped by age watched silently, their glassy eyes reflecting firelight from the broken chandelier above. A sudden creak made them both freeze. The floorboard near the grand staircase shifted under some invisible weight, a slow groan sliding through the air like a whispered warning. Charles reached out instinctively to steady himself against the peeling wallpaper, fingers trembling. "This place, it's worse than I thought," he muttered. "Feels alive." Angela's lips curved, half smile, half grimace. "It always did," she said quietly. "Dad warned me once not to come inside after 2:13 a.m. Charles blinked. "What?" She met his stare without blinking. That was his rule. Something about doors staying locked after that time, or whatever's trapped inside will slip through. A chill raced down Charles' spine, sharper than the night's sudden drop in temperature outside. He glanced at his watch. 2:09 a.m. "Great," he whispered. The house moaned again, a long, low sound somewhere deep below them, as if its very foundation was shifting under unseen pressure. Angela took a step forward toward the basement door at the end of the hall, a slab of ancient oak blackened with age and stains. "You don't want to go down there," Charles said fast, heart pounding like a drum in his chest. She stopped but didn't turn back. Instead, her hand hovered over the doorknob, then retracted slowly. "I have to," she said softly, almost to herself. Before Charles could protest further, the lights flickered violently and died, drowning them in darkness so complete it felt like swallowing black velvet whole. His breath hitched. He groped blindly for Angela's hand. Something moved beyond where sight could reach, a dragging sound on stone steps spiraling downward. No human footsteps could make that noise, not that slow and slithering. Charles forced himself forward, every nerve screaming for him to run. But Angela was already descending into that pit of shadow. The air grew colder with every step, until it felt like ice had wrapped itself around his lungs. Then, a sudden scream ripped through the silence, a ragged cry not entirely human, and exploded from below into the stillness above. She vanished into darkness as if swallowed by it willingly. Left alone on those crumbling stairs, Charles heard another sound, soft breathing right behind him, shallow and rasping. He spun around. Nothing there but empty blackness pressing close enough to drown out sanity itself. And then a whisper brushed past his ear. "You shouldn't be here." His heart thundered harder than ever before, because in that moment he realized they weren't alone downstairs, not anymore, and whatever waited had been waiting for all of them to come home. Chapter 5. The rain fell like shattered glass against the stained glass windows of the Saxon mansion, each drop a muted scream swallowed by the night. Inside, Charles Smith sat rigid in the dim library, the scent of old leather and cold ash pressing heavy against his skin. His fingers trembled around a half-empty bottle of bourbon as shadows pulled thicker in every corner. The silence between him and Angelina Vale was taut, thick enough to choke on. Outside, somewhere in the black woods, something scraped, soft but deliberate, like fingernails dragging across bark. Charles didn't turn. He dared not breathe too loudly. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Angelina's eyes were fixed on the fireplace, where faint embers flickered without flame. "Yes," she said softly, voice uneven, "but it's not outside. It's in here." Her words seemed to ripple through the air, an unseen pulse stirring beneath their skin. He swallowed hard. A sudden chill clawed at his spine, despite the fire's weak warmth. The grandfather clock ticked unevenly, one beat shorter than the next, echoing deep inside his skull. "You're sure this house isn't playing tricks?" Charles asked, though part of him already knew better. She shook her head, stepping closer to a cracked mirror hung askew on the far wall. The surface shimmered, warped, as if something pressed just beneath its glassy veneer. Her breath fogged over it for a moment before she wiped it clean with trembling fingers. "I don't think that's my reflection," Angelina muttered under her breath. Charles felt his heart stutter as he looked toward the mirror. For one split second, or maybe longer, he saw not her face, but a blur of something darker. A face half drowned in shadow, eyes blacker than midnight itself. "No," he said shakily, "that can't be." A sudden thud upstairs made them both jump, a heavy sound from Dharon Saxen's old study room, sealed tight since the night they found his body floating downstream. "Stay here," Charles ordered, but barely heard himself speak. His feet moved before his brain could protest. At the top of the creaking stairs stood a door slightly ajar. Impossible, because they'd bolted every lock earlier that day. Behind it lay a choking darkness deeper than any shadow in this house. As he reached out, a cold draft brushed past his neck, the unmistakable scent of damp earth and rot. He hesitated, and then heard it clearly. Chanting. Low voices rising and falling rhythmically, in an ancient tongue no living soul should speak aloud anymore. Each syllable vibrated against his ribcage like some terrible heartbeat. Charles pulled back suddenly as something slammed into the door from behind. "God damn it," he hissed, backing away fast enough to trip over loose carpet threads tangled around his boots. Angelina appeared beside him, with wide eyes that glistened, not with fear, but knowing, she said quietly, voice brittle like cracked glass. "They've never left." "What do you mean, who?" Charles demanded, voice cracking under pressure. "The ones who killed him." She pointed to her temple with one pale finger, a circle traced slowly and deliberately before resting there like a warning. Before he could ask more, before questions could even form, a chilling breeze swept through the room and extinguished every light source at once. Darkness swallowed them whole, suffocating and thick as blood pooling on cold stone floors below ground. Then came a whisper so close it felt carved into his ear canal. "Do not open the door after 2:13 a.m. Charles froze as an unnatural tick echoed somewhere behind him, the clock striking 2:13 exactly. A sharp scratching began again at the study door, slower this time, deliberate, patient, waiting for him to break what should never have been broken. His breath caught between terror and curiosity, and then the door creaked wider by itself. The last thing Charles saw was a pair of eyes burning faintly red from within that endless darkness before everything went black. Chapter 6. The storm had stopped, but the rain still whispered against the cracked window panes of the old Saxon mansion. A slow, steady drum like distant fingers tapping, tapping, tapping on some invisible coffin. Charles sat in the study, clutching a mug of black coffee that had long gone cold. Shadows pooled beneath his eyes, thick and bruised, as if something was gnawing at the edges of his sanity. He could hear it again, that low breath, barely audible, skimming through the darkness beyond the glass. Not outside, inside. His hands trembled. The room felt smaller now, walls closing in with each heartbeat, suffocating silence growing too loud. "Why am I here?" The question clawed at him. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet he stayed rooted by something he couldn't name, a promise or a threat whispered on the wind. A soft creak echoed behind him. Charles whipped around. Nothing but the heavy drapes swaying slightly, though no breeze should touch this room. His throat tightened. God, he thought, it's starting, the cracks in my mind. He blinked against the flickering candlelight on the desk where Angela's letter lay open. "You don't know what you've inherited." The ink looked smeared, as if written in a rush, or by shaking hands. Outside, the river groaned under its own weight, dark and sluggish, like a beast breathing through its nostrils beneath frozen skin. The clock chimed 2:13 a.m. The rule came back to him sharply, the one Professor Chatterjee had mentioned in a trembling voice during their last encounter. Never open any door after 2:13. Charles' eyes locked onto the ornate door across the room, the one leading down into the basement, where Dharon Saxen's secrets festered like rotting fruit. Something tugged at him from behind that door, an itch under his skin that refused to be ignored. The air shifted suddenly, a cold blade slicing through his jacket and settling deep into his bones. He swallowed hard, heart hammering like a warning drumbeat. Footsteps, or was it breathing, floated up from below, slow, deliberate. Then came a faint scraping sound, nails dragging across wood. His rational mind scrambled to piece together explanation after explanation. Rats, wind, his nerves fraying. No, it was something else, something alive. Charles moved toward the basement door, every step weighted with dread and urgency, both tangled inside him, like a noose tightening slowly around his throat. Before he could reach for the handle, a sharp knock rattled from inside the room behind him, soft but urgent. He spun around so fast, dizziness hit him full force. Angelina Vale stood there in shadowed doorway, the dark curls falling over her pale face, and her eyes were wild with something unreadable. "Charles," she said softly, but with steel beneath her voice. "We don't have much time." He blinked at her, confusion crashing into alarm. "What do you mean?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper rough with fear. "They're coming for me. For us. The Black Devotee's curse. It's waking up again." Her words made no sense, but her trembling hands told another story entirely. And then, the lights flickered violently, plunging them both into darkness, before snapping back on to reveal fresh scratches gouged into the wooden floorboards between them, a message carved in desperation: "Don't open the door." Charles froze, breath caught mid-choke, as an unseen presence seemed to press closer in that silent room, waiting, watching, and waiting for him. Chapter 7. The old grandfather clock in the hall groaned twice, its deep tolls vibrating through the bones of the mansion. Angela sat frozen, breath hitching as if each chime drew something closer from the dark. Outside, the wind slammed against the windows like a fist, angry, impatient. She could feel it now, eyes, sharp and cold, threading through every shadowed corner of Saxon Manor. She hadn't wanted to come back here, not after everything she'd heard and what she'd seen. But the letters from Charles had been urgent, trembling with fear, his voice breaking over phone lines like a ghost desperate to be heard. "Angela, you have to listen. There's something wrong here." Her fingers tightened around the iron railing of the staircase as she descended toward the basement, the room where Charles last told her he saw it. The smell hit her before she stepped inside, damp earth rotting beneath decades of secrets. Mold clung to every surface like an ancient sickness. The air was thick with stale cold and something fouler underneath. Old blood, or worse, old power. Charles was there already, hunched by a circle scratched into the concrete floor. His eyes were wild, darting over symbols that made no sense, but whispered dread in languages Angela couldn't pronounce. He traced his finger along one curve, a serpent biting its own tail. "I swear I didn't write this," he muttered, voice cracking like dry wood breaking. But it appeared overnight. He looked up, pale under flickering bulb light. "I'm losing my mind." Angela swallowed down panic. "You're not." A sudden creak snapped their attention to the far corner, where darkness pooled thickest, and for a heartbeat they both held their breath, waiting for whatever waited to step forward. Nothing moved. "Do you hear it?" Charles whispered. The softest scrape echoed again, a slow dragging sound, like nails raking across stone just beneath the floorboards. Neither dared to look directly. "I think," Angela began, but stopped herself. "You think what?" Charles pressed. Before she could answer, a sharp metallic clang shattered silence from upstairs, the unmistakable slam of a heavy door closing hard enough to shake glass. They exchanged a look filled with raw alarm. Angela's heart hammered against her ribs in uneven thumps. Someone's in the house. They scrambled up together, stumbling into shadows stretching longer than reason allowed. The mansion felt alive, its walls breathing slow and hungry around them. On the landing, Charles pointed toward the library doorway, where faint light spilled out unevenly. "Thomas," Angela hissed, the name tasting bitter in her mouth. Of course. A figure stood silhouetted against shelves lined with dusty tomes, the stepbrother's crooked grin barely visible under thinning hair, and a face carved by greed and malice. "Well done," Thomas said smoothly, stepping forward with practiced ease. "You're right on time." Before either could react, Maria emerged from behind him, a flash of red silk and colder eyes than any winter night. And then Victor Kana slinked in from another corridor, like a wolf circling its prey. Angela blinked, overwhelmed by sudden danger closing in from all sides. "What do you want?" Charles demanded, voice steady despite shaking hands. Thomas smiled wider still, malice folded into his words like poison lace. "We want what Dharon promised us, all of it, and we can't have that while you're standing in our way." A chill deeper than any draft twisted through Angela's spine as footsteps closed around them. Then came the warning, the one Charles had found scrawled hastily on a torn page from an old Saxon ledger. "Do not open your door after 2:13 a.m. Angela glanced at her watch. It read exactly 2:12 a.m. A slow grin spread across Victor's face as he pulled a knife glinting beneath flickering chandeliers. And outside, the river began to bubble with dark fury, as if whatever lay beneath was waking once more. Chapter 8. The air in the basement was thick with cold, unnatural cold, like it had been trapped underground for decades. Charles's breath came out in ragged puffs, each exhale a ghostly vapor curling and fading into the darkness. His fingers brushed against the rough stone wall, slick with dampness. As he edged forward, the weak beam of his flashlight slicing through the black like a knife. A soft scrape echoed behind him. A fingernail against wood? No. Metal. Chains. The sound trembled through the silence and died, leaving only the weight of something unseen pressing down on his chest. "Don't look back," he told himself. "Just keep moving." But when the light flickered briefly, just enough to catch a glimpse, he saw it, a shadow detached from any shape, hovering close to the far corner where the walls converged. It pulsed, breathing, breathing. Angela's words from earlier twisted inside him. He was never really gone. Charles swallowed hard. Rational mind or not, this place was unraveling him. And then, a sharp click. The basement door slammed shut above him. No wind, no human hand, just that heavy silence wrapping around his skull like a noose. His pulse hammered in his ears as he spun toward the sound. The flashlight swung wildly in his grip until it settled on an ancient altar. Gnarled roots etched into its surface, dried blood staining cracks like old scars. That altar wasn't mentioned anywhere in the estate's files or even whispered about by locals. "Jesus," Charles muttered under his breath. The smell hit him then, the sickly sweet stench of rot mixed with burning herbs, scorched earth rising from somewhere beneath the stones. Behind him, the faint scrape again. Closer now. Something was breathing right there in the dark with him. "Show yourself," Charles said, voice brittle but desperate for control. Silence answered, thick and suffocating. Then a whisper curled through the room. "Do not open the door after 2:13 a.m. He checked his watch. It blinked 2:12 a.m. flat. Heart threatening to burst free from his ribs, Charles edged toward the door, but stopped abruptly as a new sound rose, a low chant, threading itself beneath the creak of old timber and distant dripping water. Voices, or memories, he couldn't tell anymore, and with them came flashes at the edges of his vision. Angela standing at the riverbank just before dawn, eyes hollow yet burning, Thomas's face contorted with greed and fear, Maria Velasquez's laugh echoing like shattered glass, and Professor Chatterjee whispering incantations that scraped at sanity. A scream tore through that fabric of visions, piercing and raw, and suddenly Charles felt wetness splatter across his cheek. Warm blood or cold sweat? He brought his hand up to wipe it away, but recoiled sharply, his fingers sticky, stained deep crimson despite no wounds on him. Not outside. Inside his head. Something was waking here in this crypt beneath Dharon Saxen's house, a presence older than memory itself, hungry for those who dared steal life from death's grasp. Charles's rational mind fought harder than ever against slipping into madness, as shadows began to crawl up walls like living ink, spreading unchecked across parchment. Then, a hollow knock sounded from within the floorboards underfoot, slow and deliberate, 3 times exactly before stopping at 2:13 a.m. sharp. The basement door rattled violently, as if trying to open itself, while an invisible breath kissed Charles's neck, icy cold and cruel. "You broke the rule." And just as suddenly, the lights went out completely. Chapter 9. The wind clawed through the broken windows of the Saxon estate like a living thing, low, desperate, scratching at the walls. Inside, the stale air clung to Angelina's skin. It smelled of mildew and something darker, rotting paper maybe, or old blood long dried but never quite gone. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the ancient ledger on the desk, Dharon's last journal, bound in cracked leather, embossed with a symbol she didn't recognize, but that gnawed at the edge of her memory. She hesitated. The clock in the hall struck 2. 2:13. A shiver stole down her spine. "Don't open it," Charles's voice cracked behind her. She spun, his face pale, eyes wild with exhaustion and fear. "Why not? This is what we need. You don't understand. Not yet." His gaze darted toward the shadow pooling beneath the doorframe. The darkness there wasn't natural. It breathed, it waited. Her heart hammered like a warning drum. She glanced back at the book, then at Charles, then back again, and suddenly realized they were no longer alone. A slow creak echoed from the basement stairs behind them, a sound so faint she might have imagined it if Charles hadn't flinched beside her. "It's coming up," he whispered. Angela swallowed hard and dropped the ledger to the floor, where it hit wood with a dull thud that sounded too loud in the silence that followed. "What is it?" she demanded, voice barely steady. Charles shook his head. "I don't know how to explain it. It's not Dharon, not exactly, but tied to him." His breath caught as he stepped closer to her, eyes scanning every shadow like he expected claws to strike out any second. Something slid past outside. The window rattled violently, as if a fist pounded against it from beyond. They both froze. Suddenly, Angelina's vision blurred, then sharpened into something wrong. Reflections flickering in broken mirrors along the hallway walls showed fleeting glimpses of figures standing just out of sight, whispering silhouettes that vanished when she blinked. The house groaned again, a low, guttural moan that set teeth on edge and made her skin crawl. A cold hand seemed to brush along her spine, not real but terrifyingly tangible all at once. Charles gripped her arm tighter. "Remember what I told you. Never open doors after 2:13. Her throat tightened around a scream she didn't want to release. A flash of movement darted down the hall, too fast for human eyes, and then darkness swallowed everything as power snapped off with a crack and hiss. Silence pressed in heavy and complete, except for one sound, distant dripping, from somewhere deep below. "We have to get out," Charles urged desperately, but Angelina couldn't move yet. Something was pulling her toward the basement stairs, now yawning wide like a mouth ready to swallow them whole. "No," she said softly, but even as she spoke, she felt it. An impossible weight pressing down inside her chest, dragging memories loose and twisting them until they weren't hers anymore. Faces she'd never seen screaming behind her eyelids, voices chanting words that tasted like ash and rust in her mouth. And then the basement door slammed shut behind them with a finality that shattered all hope of escape. Darkness closed in around them both, thick enough to choke on, and from deep below came a voice, raspy, ancient, calling Angela by name. "Angela Vale, you belong here now." Her breath hitched as fingers brushed cold air near her ear, but when she whipped around, nothing was there, only silence. The rain didn't stop. It hammered the cracked window panes like ancient nails driven deep into wood, rotting with time. Angela sat rigid in the dim parlor, the fireplace long dead, the scent of damp stone and old paper crawling beneath her skin. Somewhere outside, beyond the creeping fog that devoured Saxen's estate, the river churned, black and slow, swallowing secrets with a hungry appetite. She glanced at the clock on the mantel. 2:12 a.m., 1 minute to go. Her breath caught. The house exhaled around her, low and wet, as if it knew what was coming. Shadows twisted in corners she hadn't seen before, elongated fingers brushing against peeling wallpaper, stained by forgotten sins. She thought of Charles, the man who once stood so firm beside her, but now fractured, lost inside his own unraveling mind. He'd warned her not to open any doors after this hour, not to listen for anything beyond the sounds of storm and sorrow. But curiosity had teeth tonight, and it gnawed at her resolve. A soft creak floated from the hallway, a floorboard sighing under invisible weight. Her heart skipped a beat, thrumming like a drumbeat in an empty crypt. She wasn't alone. "Angela," whispered a voice, brittle as dry leaves, "do you remember what Dharon said?" She spun toward the door at the end of the hall, the one sealed tight since she'd arrived, barricaded with splintered furniture and rusted nails. Her hands trembled. Memories stabbed sharp edges through her mind. Dharon's voice low and urgent. Beware what wakes when blood is spilled beneath Blood Moon's shadow. The door shivered under a pressure only she could feel, the unmistakable weight of something just beyond. Angela swallowed hard. Then, a violent crash shattered silence as the barrier gave way. Splinters flew like screams across cold tile. The room beyond yawned open, swallowing light whole. Inside was nothing but darkness, and something else. Something watching. From that void emerged a slow pulse, a heartbeat not hers or any living thing's, but his. Dharon's presence curled through that black space, ancient as rot, hungry as grief. The air thickened with decay, sweat and earth and something sourer still, fear made flesh. And then a voice breathed from the shadows, not quite human. You think death ends me? Foolish child. Angela stumbled back, breath ragged against icy fear clawing up her throat. She felt eyes, countless unseen eyes pressing into her skin like needles soaked in cold fire. Suddenly Charles appeared behind her, wild-eyed and broken, whispering frantic warnings no one else would hear. They're not dead. They never left. Behind them the mansion groaned, as if its very walls were awakening from centuries-long sleep, and from deep below came a sound, rhythmic chanting, echoing through blood-stained stone corridors, buried under layers of dust and lies. Angela realized too late what she had unleashed. Because something ancient had claimed this place long before Dharon ever did, something older than sin itself, waiting patiently for its ritual to finish. And now it was hungry for more. The last flicker of candlelight vanished, as darkness swallowed everything whole, and the night whispered one final warning. They are coming. There was no turning back now.